What do you want to talk
The
about today, Tom?
so we had a subject that we were talking about yesterday where we were talking about, hey, we go into a company that's like 65 people, and about 15 of the 65 is management, which means, they're either the president or vice presidents reporting up to the president. They're then directors reporting up to the vice presidents. And they're typically broken along very traditional lines. One of the things that the gentleman who created NVIDIA was complaining about was, you're not all doing the same thing. You can't all really have the same departments. But I don't even want to go there. I want to go to this other thought, which was when you're doing some sort of agile transformation or you're doing any sort of transformation with them, you're doing intentional culture. And you have a couple of key components of that. One is which is how you build teams, and the second of which is how you ceremonialize work. My contention yesterday, right when we were breaking off, was that if you ceremonialize the work well, most of the management work goes away entirely. It just ceases to exist. And potentially even the need to have a management role to mentor, guide, lead, and grow that person.
Yeah, I found that idea is very interesting to me because I I have a hard time envisioning how that role can be replaced by essentially, if I understand you correctly, by a group.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Uh, and you are not alone in this, because I dare say, like the company I set up that basically ran this way, which was Menlo Innovation, the maybe I don't know what the number is now, 25, 30,000 people who've toured it over 25 years. I don't think any of them understood that either. That the thought was, you know, that Bob, Rich, James, and I were managing people as sort of the founders. But actually, if you went to the floor and you asked people who their manager is, they would look funny at you. And then and I think Rich put it in one of his books, if you insisted on repeating the question or you rephrase the question like, well, who do you report to? They'd all just start pointing to each other. And I suspect it's the thing that we backed into, that we didn't really even think about ourselves that profoundly. And one of the reasons this isn't maybe more elaborated on is once we sort of just started doing it and discovered how self-sufficient the teams really could be, to the point of hiring and firing and promoting each other. Uh, and I'm gonna stop on one that's an idea that you have that I don't think we did a good enough job of, uh, which is growing each other. Um, I think we could have done more ceremonies for that.
I was going to ask you about that because very often personal growth comes from facing down
Personal demons.
hard truths that you've been avoiding
Mm.
in one
Yeah,
manner or another, and asking peers to expose those hard truths to you is a lot, and the idea of ceremonializing that is intriguing to me. But I'm
so they
what
have
kind of
in part.
culture you need to build around it to make that feasible.
They have in part done that, uh, but I don't think it's. I think they've ceremonialized the feedback aspect of it. So the interesting thing about all of the work being basically ceremonial is, there's natural mentoring for core skill growth. There was a ceremony for like feedback where you could ask the team for sort of like personal feedback on you and how you're doing, how you could grow. And you could even ask, and I think that ceremony, it got overlapped perhaps too much with looking for a pay increase as well. The team could upgrade your level. People would go to that, and it could be a tough love type event where it's like, yeah, they're going to give the hard feedback. And once, this was a story Rich shared with me maybe over 10 years ago, might have even made it inside of one of his books, I don't know, is somebody's like, hey, I want to be promoted, I want to make more money. So the team convened and did this ceremonial form of interacting with him and interacting with each other. And then when the team was all done, they were like, we think we should let him go. When you force the team to really think about how you were working with them, they're like, generally, like, once we all got together to discuss this person, we're all like, y'all makes us feel bad. He wasn't, by the way, a bad worker or a bad programmer. And I think when Rich shared that story with me, I was sad. I was made sad by the story because I thought that feedback should have come much earlier.
Hmm.
By the way, I think they actually let him go.
Yeah, well, that you gotta if you're gonna ceremonialize the feedback, then you have to take the consequences
You
of
gotta think.
it.
I was wondering, this is just me. But this is me looking like thinking about what does it mean to literally not have a management layer responsible for that.
Yeah.
When I heard that story, first of all, I thought it was beautiful that the team could come to that conclusion, and brilliant and incredibly empowering. I thought it was interesting that, when you raise the issue, uh, the team could be self-reflexive enough to go, we think this is our next course of action.
Hmm. Yeah.
Uh, but I was like, wow, it feels like there's a missing ceremony where that shouldn't have caught anybody by surprise.
Yeah. When I was at Ithaca, there was a team, and I wasn't on this team, but one of my compadres there related the experience to me. And this team had a regular ceremony, and I for the life of me can't remember what they called it, but it was kind of like what you're talking about, a ceremonialized process that each person was would say something that they didn't like about someone else on the team. And the team member that was being referenced was only allowed to ask questions, could
Oh,
not
wow.
respond with a
Like a
statement.
formal dialogue technique for the
Right.
ceremony.
Well, that's like, it's like if you think about the ceremony everybody thinks about first is the wedding ceremony, right?
Right.
Somebody says a little preamble, and then, maybe the person gets to say, one person says something, another person says something, and then there's, like there is a clearly defined structure, even though it may vary,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
always mapped out ahead that there will be a structure to the communication of whether there'll be a question or a statement or whatever. And so the idea here that just that simple rule that you weren't allowed to respond with anything but a question forces you to be introspective.
Yeah.
It,
I've
it's
seen I've
it's
seen variants on that in various dialogue techniques where the only thing you're allowed to do is state back to them what you heard.
yeah, which is active listening, right? That's
Yeah.
just forcing people to listen actively. And
So what you're saying, and then the person can then respond. But
right,
all you're allowed to do is, so that would be the same sort of thing.
right. And but this is the beauty of ceremony, and why you and I love it so much is because it puts constraints on the communication that essentially force you to get the outcome, the product, as you call it, that you were
So
seeking.
let me describe a ceremony that I like, so we're talking about how do you meet this need and how you could structure it. That comes out of the clean community. They call it the clean feedback ceremony. And at its core, there's like three components, but it begins with the idea of like me saying to you, Tom, I have some clean feedback I'd like to give you. Would you like to to hear it? Like some sort of invitation. All right. And maybe not even that phrasing might be, I have some clean feedback for you if you would like to hear it. It's kind of
And
like an
if I could
invitation.
interject there, that it takes it takes courage for somebody to decide to do that.
Yes.
The nice thing about a regularly scheduled ceremony is that it takes less courage because you're
Less
there
courage. Like
for the purpose and
if
you've
the
carved
team
out the
agrees that they're
time.
willing to do this,
Yeah.
the and then they have a very clear structure in clean feedback. The first is literally what you observed. So I observed you doing this. ABC, whatever I observed. It's very straightforward. Then what makes the feedback more fun is because the clean community kind of believes reality exists in your head. Is you take responsibility next for the reality that exists in your head. From what I observed, here's what I inferred. You phrase it multiply. Here's the story I made up in my head. And it's like when you do that, you're just taking the freaking pressure off the person you observe. The story I made up in my head is that you didn't really care to improve the quality of your code in that routine. And you didn't care to learn how to write better code. The impact on me, so that the third pack is the impact of me making up this story. So now it's like the impact is not on what you did. The impact is on me having made up this story. Is I want to stop. I've stopped wanting to give you feedback on how to write better code. Right. And that's the core structure of I'd have to go back now and to look at their ceremony to figure out. I feel like that's an incomplete ceremony.
Yeah. Well,
It's like
the beginning steps there follow pretty closely the famous crucial conversations
yes.
approach to confronting a situation, if you will, that with somebody that is troubling you.
You may well be entirely correct in your assertion yesterday that the real challenge for intentional culture, it's too big of a change for most organizations to go from their 15 leaders to just maybe if they had 65 people, maybe 10 teams with basically little or no leadership. My thought is, I'm not convinced we can convince anyone to go this way, but just so you know where I'm thinking, when I'm thinking of intentional culture, it's very Menlonian. It's very like, if you do this well, you just don't need those 15 roles. Where I would love intentional culture to go. And I get that we can probably not get there. So I don't want to overstate it. But there is a state in intentional culture where almost all the leadership roles simply go away. No one wants to hear that, probably. The traditional leadership roles, the hierarchy, I'm going to work my way up the hierarchy roles.
Yeah. Well,
For
and
smaller companies, I
the
don't know what happens after 150 people.
the word leadership obviously can have different meanings, and I believe that we've undervalued technical leadership for far too long. And some companies are more enlightened on that now. And surprisingly, actually, some of the older, larger companies have wised up and created professional career pathways that never involve taking on direct reports. Um, I think one of the challenges with moving from a traditional organizational structure to what we have now is what we're trying to build now is the is removing the prestige associated with the number of people that report
To
underneath.
you. Yeah.
Like
It really breaks the whole model
it's, like, and how often, like,
terribly.
you talk to a leader and you say, like, oh, you're a leader, like what, tell me about that. They'll say, well, I had about 150 people reporting underneath me and with four direct reports. And it's like, oh, so you were important.
Right.
No, actually, I barely added any value at all because I wasn't in senior leadership, so I wasn't really, defining the direction of the organization. And I wasn't
Right.
actually doing anything because everybody below me was actually doing all the
I
work.
mean, all the work.
I was just sitting there taking up space and being prestigious, like really, unfortunately, that those people, they struggle with a sense of worth in their role.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and so what the way that they deal with that is by making decisions that they shouldn't be making. Because that if they make decisions, at least they feel like they're contributing. And
So,
and
so I've made this decision. We're switching from this tool to that tool, like
whatever
literally happened
whatever the
recently.
decision is, there's a high probability that they shouldn't have made it because they probably don't belong on the org chart at all.
Your role is really administrative at its core. Your statement is well, different from my approach or my mental model from Mentlo. But I won't even say my approach because in bigger non companies, they don't know what the approach. Your approach is understand your role as coach and mentor of the people underneath you to grow and build their skills, right? To grow and build their skills and things that and there's certain things like their personal skills, but also stuff that we recognize now as important professional skills, skills around continuous learning and continuous improvement, like to bring those skills to the table. But my concern, Tom, is I don't know that they know those in most of these cases either.
No,
Although
they're not
people in
trained
those,
for it.
yeah, they're not
Some
trained to.
companies do teach, like they have a pathway, and I actually was writing about this in the book yesterday. You know, it you should have a pathway where if somebody wants to move into leadership, you have to have a means for them to gain experience in doing that before you move them, because it's unfair to everyone involved. If you just take somebody who was a great individual contributor who's expressed interest in being promoted and moving them into a role where the skills that are required to be successful are completely different and they don't have them. And now you're going to take somebody and put them in that role, and then you're going to actually have other people dependent on them. And in all likelihood, those people had someone else that was working with them who may well have had the skills, how they built them over time or whatever. And you're going to take them and say, now here's a newbie who doesn't have these skills that is now responsible for your career and your growth path.
If you're there as a manager, your role or goal should be I'm going to build ceremony enough that this thing runs without me. And when it runs without me, I can go on, I can either join the team and grow my skills with the team, or I can go on and start something new and see if I can get people to do that, to follow that. And maybe it will add value to the company.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well, you know, one of the other things that I talked about in the book yesterday was titling. You know, we tend to use titles that were developed uh, back in the industrial period of our history and business, and those titles have such a strong cultural and traditional meaning that if that in terms of your career, like if you say to somebody, I'm a director, I'm a vice president, I'm a C something O, um, you know, like you place yourself in a hierarchy there that signifies your importance.
Right.
And I there was I mentioned in the book a company. I read a book about this tea company years ago. It's called, the book is called The Republic of Tea, and the company is called The Republic of Tea. And if you look on the can, they come in little cylindrical tins, and if you look at the tin, there's always a little blurb, and it's written by the minister of leaves or the minister of something. And they all of their every role in the company is the minister of something. So
Wow.
there's literally no hierarchy defined within the title of the person. Like they could be the minister of market ideas, and you know that might be the guy running the whole thing, but you wouldn't know that, you know, like by looking at their title.
I like minister. That works well for me.
And I love the idea that titles reflect the work that that person is doing as opposed to the level that they're at.
To me, to me, it's even broken down further. To me, it's like the only title I'm interested in is the title that's the role within a ceremony, and all the other titles I think are silly.
Yeah, and
Um,
there are organizations that don't have titles, but that gets more and more challenging the bigger the organization gets because the
yeah,
outside
well,
world starts wanting titles.
everyone else wants a title on your card. The um,
It's like I'm
so yeah,
just
so that's my
Tom.
thought is that's my core rumination on my side is uh and we'll see how you approach it as you're writing the knowing that they don't really want to go. If we get a startup at the right size, we can probably get them to do bolder experiments. And even at 65, if 15 people have hired in with a hierarchical role expectation, it's probably too late
Yeah. Well, I
unless
think if
the
you hire us, if you have, to put it bluntly, the balls to hire us,
and
then then we're going to ask you to rethink everything. If you
yeah,
hired us when you have 65 people, it's not too late, but it's not, you know, like if you'd have hired us when you were 25 people, then it probably would have
and
been
be a
painless.
lot easier to scale up
It
from
would
that
have been
point.
painless. We could have built the thing and
Yeah,
no one would have been disrupted. The bigger you are when you bring us in, the more likely there'll be some disruption. But you can't, you know, you can't right size a ship. You can't, you know, you can't fix the ship without turning it, you know. That's the problem with these giant organizations. There's these huge ships that are pointed in a certain direction, and no amount of spinning of the wheel is gonna move them. There's
yeah,
just too much inertia
yes.
and too much mass to turn the thing. So you can push a
Like,
little bit and it might move a tiny bit, but it's never going to go from facing north to facing south. It's never gonna happen.
What you learn when you study it might be different in modern ships, but in older ships, the the controls up in the control room, like you'd throw a lever. All that would do is move a lever down in the engine room
Right, yes.
that was assigned to the guy who actually had the valves to
Right,
turn the valve.
right, exactly. It was just a signal. It wasn't an
Yeah,
actual control.
turning the wheel is just turning something down there, and someone down there was doing something.
Right, like increasing the output on the left engine or the right engine.
So it's like that's true in big companies, except man, those two are often really disconnected. It's like
Really. And that goes back to what we were talking about yesterday about playing operator, like you say you want to, slow down and you tell somebody and they tell somebody and they tell somebody, and by the time it gets to anybody who can do anything about it, it's like, I guess we're doing okay.
great talking to everybody. Maybe there'll be something useful in this for us.
we'll, we'll edit it down.